Hi, Julie Usher, Recipes for a Sweet Life. One thing I love about making videos is that they get me into the holiday spirit well in advance. It's actually only October out there and I'm already doing Christmas videos for the next few months. I've got a great lineup, I think, of everything from cookie projects to simpler recipes that you'll be seeing through the course of November and December. So let's get started on the first one of those Christmas videos. This one's going to be a snow globe cookie. In my book, Ultimate Cookies, I do an easier 3D sandwich version of the snow globe. So if you're just getting started with 3D cookies, you might want to check out my book or my app, which also contains it. Today, though, we're going fully three-dimensional insofar as the top of the cookie is actually going to be a globe when we're done. It's going to be contoured cookie dough. So let's talk about what you need to get started. This will be both a decorating and assembly video. This is basically a 4-cookie project. You'll need a domed back that's fully iced. This has been iced and dried with royal icing. A domed window cookie, and I'm going to show you exactly how I cut this and dipped it in a moment. And then 2 cookies which will form the base. The size of these isn't so crucial. This one I think is about 2 inches, and this one is about 1.5 inches. I've also got some larger bases. They were cut with this plaque cutter, which is about 3 inches, doubled up with this other plaque cutter, which is about 2 inches. So you can go crazy on the bases. They don't necessarily need to be a particular size. This dome, by point of reference, is about 4.5 inches, and it's got a 2.5-inch window cut in the middle. I've got a larger size you'll see here, which is about 6 inches across with a 3-inch window. So you have some flexibility. I'm going to put those pieces aside for now. We'll come back to them later. And I'm going to show you exactly how I baked this contoured piece. I've pre-rolled a little bit of gingerbread dough. My gingerbread recipe is on my website. There'll be a link to it in the video description. And I encourage you when you're contouring cookies, I've got a whole nother video on that, to get creative with the things you contour over. So this is just a Pyrex container. I cut a 6-inch, or 4.5-inch rather, circle out of the dough and gently fit it over the back of the Pyrex container. I baked something like this to create this shape. But I cut a window in another half prior to baking to create the windowed part. And I did that here with just a 2.5-inch round cutter. Once the dough's on the cookie, just gently press it into the middle and pull it out either with your trussing needle or the tip of a paring knife. This dough that you're pulling aside can be balled up and reserved and re-rolled, of course. Then I sit this on a cookie sheet so it doesn't slide around a lot, pop it in the oven, bake it the normal amount of time, which is about 10 minutes at 375. Let it cool slightly, and then take a paring knife and just gently loosen it, rotate it, and pop it off the top. I have not greased this container at all. There's no need to do that. If you do grease it, chances are the window will open up and slide as it bakes. So that's the basic construction of that. And again, I have a whole other video on contouring if you want to get more specific about it. Now let's talk about how we get the icing on a domed cookie. So I'm talking about how do we get this all coated. You could airbrush the cookie, that would be one simple way to do it, but we're actually going to cover it with royal icing because I like that effect. I have a whole nother video on dipping as well, and in that video I showed how to dip a piece like this that doesn't have a window. And when I do that, I completely submerge it in the icing, head down, and then pop it up. With the window cookies, I do them slightly differently, so I want to pause and show you how I do those. I tend to rotate them through the icing rather than dipping them head down, just to leave a cleaner edge around the top of the cookie. Here I've got icing of dipping consistency. It's royal icing, and I have all the consistency adjustments on my website. You're looking for it to kind of flow rather gradually to quickly off the end of a spoon. Usually it's about 2 to 3 tablespoons of water for every cup of my royal icing glue that gets it to this consistency. I like my icing to sit a little bit so the bubbles rise to the surface and pop out, but if we don't get them all out of this container, we will pop them as soon as it's dipped. So here's my completely cooled window cookie, and I submerge an end and I rotate it through. You might want to use gloves for this because it's kind of messy, but since we're not eating these today, I'm not doing that. And you'll see how I'm rotating it through. This tends to keep the icing out of that inner ring. So I have a nice clean edge. I missed a spot there. Okay. And then I just shake, shake, shake off the excess. I missed a little spot here. So what I'm going to do is, while the icing is still wet, Dab a little bit on there, and then shake out that unevenness till we get a nice smooth coat all the way around. You can see this makes a mess. Once you've got the bulk of it off and it's a nice smooth coat, take a look. If you see any air bubbles, now's the time to pop them. I've got one big one here. You want to get that before the icing's dry. And then what I do for drying is I set it on another container that I can just sort of ease it down onto and let it drain, all the excess drain off. I'm going to clean my hands and then clean up the bottom edge of this cookie, and we'll be right back with the next step. Okay, cleaned up a little bit, but not very long. As soon as I'm done dipping, I maybe wait 5 or 10 minutes for any additional excess to drain off. This is why I like to have it elevated. And then I come in with a paring knife and just kind of slice off, cleaning between each slice any extra icing. This will just make it easier in the final assembly. I'll have less of a rough edge at the bottom that I'll need to pare down, and you'll see that in the next step. So I go all the way around, just cleaning up and straightening that edge. I waited a little long before doing this. I should have popped a few more air bubbles. This is a little more air bubbly than usual. You want to pop air bubbles immediately after dipping. But I'll be covering a lot of that, so that won't be a big deal. Okay, so clean up the edge, set it aside to fully dry, ideally overnight, and then we can begin the decorating and construction process. First step of the construction process is taking your two dried halves. We're going to end up working on these green ones I have over here. I just want to show you how I prepare the halves before I start decorating on them. I have some white ones that I dipped earlier, completely dry. So even if I do neaten up the bottom edge, as I did on this one, they won't come together in a nice, perfect fit. So before you start decorating, you want to file down the bottoms so that you get as perfect a seam as possible, so that when they view together, when you're ultimately done, there won't be any big openings. I've filed this one down already. If for eating purposes, I will of course use food-safe utensils like a grater or a microplaner to file them down. But if I'm just doing these for display, which I am today, then I'll take a piece of sanding paper and file them down. This side was already filed. That's the basic process. This side is already filed. You can see how straight it is. So the one that I need to file so that they mesh up really well is actually the window one. If you're concerned about handling them too much, because your hands can sometimes leave spots on the cookies, then just cover it with a little bit of paper towel. So you just want to continue like that until you get a nice seamless fit. And I would need more time on this particular piece. But just as an example, let me show you what's been done with these green ones, which I've already gotten partially underway. They were both nicely filed, and you can see what a nice tight fit you can achieve by sanding. The other thing I've done on these pieces is I've marked the top of each side because I want them when they come together to look symmetric, to match up. So I've marked the top with a little black mark. That's edible food marker. So I know when I assemble them exactly how I want them aligned. So what I'm going to try to do, this is a time-consuming process. There are different ways to decorate, and this project is extremely versatile. This particular globe I actually stenciled. I laid down frosting sheets and stenciled through them with an airbrush. This one I've actually laid the frosting sheets directly on it. Such is the case also with this green globe. I've laid the frosting sheets and a bunch of applique work on top, as well as did a little bit of piping. The first step, after filing everything down, is to lay the frosting sheets. I did the top half of this, so I'm just going to show you how I finish off the sides with frosting sheets. They're an edible paper made out of sugar and starch. I like to decorate them off and using craft paper punches because you can cut out nice and fun shapes. And so these little loopy patterns on the bottom were actually created using that punch, and then I cut them in half and simply stuck them down with a little bit of corn syrup. Same process for the side piece. I've got this long sort of crisscrossy piece that I'm going to end up putting across the middle to mirror that one. That was used with a slightly different paper punch, craft paper punch, one that allows you to do these long sort of trim pieces, a Martha Stewart product. Punch down, match up the piece in the front, make sure the piece of paper is aligned in the back, punch again, and you can create a very long strip, which is really fun. So a little bit on craft paper punches. I just get those in my local craft supply store. Now, to put frosting sheets on directly, you can just stick them on loosely and then airbrush through them, as I said, and that's how I did that one. But here we're going to actually stick them on. And I want this one arranged such that I am able to put a little red bead there and a little red bead right before the seam. So I think I want to cut it, I want the same thing on the other side, so I think I'm going to cut it right smack down the middle here and hope that works. I do like to elevate these pieces when I'm working on them so I can really see how they're looking from the side, as opposed to having them, get them closer to eye level, and this one's pretty close. It could be a little bit higher. Now there's typically a front and a back to the frosting sheet. One side's a little more shiny than the other, and you just want to make sure you get the same side down. I want the matte side up. And I'm just applying a little bit of corn syrup to get this tacky, not sopping wet, and that will be enough to adhere it to my iced cookie. If you get it too wet, it can actually dissolve the paper or leave a spot on it, and that's not so attractive. So I've got that running right down through the middle, and I'm going to do that on the other side and trim off the excess, and then we'll be ready to lay the larger royal icing transfers. Paper tends to want to lift at the edges, so you just want to make sure you get an extra little bit of corn syrup down there. I'm trying very hard not to get the corn syrup on the icing itself, the green icing, because it will dry and leave a shiny spot, and I really don't want to see that. Okay, once the frosting sheets are down, the next step is applying royal icing appliques. These are little royal icing transfers that were piped initially on another piece of acetate, allowed to dry and then popped off. And the reason I might do applique work rather than piping directly is I have a little more control with their placement and shape. Big, large, round pieces are hard to pipe on something contoured without them dripping and changing shape. So now that they're already set, I just stick them down with a little thick royal icing glue, and they'll maintain exactly the look that I want. Typically when designing these things, I do tend to get an idea in my head first before I start doing all of this. So don't be intimidated if this looks super complicated. You know, just draw something out, make the piece, plan the pieces you're going to need, and then the actual placing of them is pretty straightforward. Okay, and then the last appliques I need. The beauty about frosting sheets versus wafer paper is you can pipe and glue on top of them almost immediately, whereas wafer paper will tend to lift up if it gets anything wet icing or anything on top of it. So the other thing I have are these bigger red pieces, slightly bigger royal icing transfers in between each of these pieces. And again, I'm just mimicking what I did on the back side of the globe. This is going to be the front window. You could gloss these beads too by painting a little corn syrup on the outside, but I tend not to do that to the back piece until I have it fully assembled, because otherwise the back will stick onto the assembly board, and we don't want that. I think I'm going to just leave these a matte finish. As I'm going around, I'm just pressing on my frosting sheets to make sure they're fully down. No edges sticking up, because the next step will be actually placing royal icing dots. And you do want the frosting sheets to be fully stuck down before you put any icing on top. Okay, with the frosting sheets and royal icing transfers down, the last detail on these is adding royal icing beadwork, which I do pipe on because these are very small beads and they won't change shape in the course of laying them on these small, on the sides, because they are so small. So I've got icing of beadwork consistency, and I have all the royal icing adjustments in a link in the video description. And I'm just kind of piping a medium-sized dot down the side of each of these. You'll notice that I've changed my chair height, and that's because I want to be as close to eye level as possible when I'm piping on the sides of something. If I have to crouch, or if I'm too far above it, I really can't see if they're going down round. So this is a much better position for me. So I've got bigger dots along there, and then I want to do some teeny dots all around the little daisy patterns. I've got those started already. So I'm just going to continue. And here I'm not changing the opening of the tip, I'm just not pushing much at all. So even with the same size opening, you can get very different sized dots just by controlling the pressure on the bag. Okay, so I've got a top-down view, and now I'm just going to clean up this inner edge by piping red dots here. And I like to be overhead for the same reason as I wanted to have a side view on the other ones, just to make sure they're coming down around and covering everything I want them to cover. When I come around to this edge, I want to make sure they conceal the cut edge of this frosting sheet, if at all possible, just because I don't like how that cut edge looks. Okay, with all the dots on the outside, we are done with the outsides. We're going to take a little bit of break, and I'm going to come back in part 2 and show you how to put the little vignette on the inside and how to put it all together. Till then, live sweetly.